My stepson Ethan told his girlfriend I was nobody, just some guy pretending to play dad. He said it in that flat, practiced voice teenage boys use when they want to sound grown. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. Through the half-open door, I caught every syllable, the pause before pretending, the laughter that followed. It landed like a nail through the chest. Not because of what it meant, but because of how easily it came out. Words like that don't appear out of nowhere. They live somewhere first. They grow quietly, until they finally find a mouth brave enough to speak them. For a moment I just stood there, grocery bags cutting into my hands, rain dripping from my jacket, the smell of wet asphalt clinging to me. On the other side of the door, Ethan's girlfriend giggled. Jessica said something I couldn't make out. Laura's voice joined them, light, casual. And for a split second, I almost believed it wasn't about me. But then I heard it again. He's not my real dad. The kind of sentence that doesn't sound cruel until you realize how final it is. That night, I came home late, soaked through, arms full of food they'd never thank me for. Laura's car was in the driveway, the windows fogged from the warmth inside. I could see silhouettes moving, the shape of the family I thought I'd built. I paused in the rain, holding onto that image. Maybe I should have turned the car around right there. Maybe that was the last mercy I could have offered myself. Instead, I went in. The door creaked like it was warning me. Inside, the air was thick with laughter. The table was set with takeout containers I hadn't paid for, but would later find on my card. Ethan and Jessica sat at the kitchen island, heads bent over a phone, laughing at something I'd never be invited to understand. Laura was leaning against the counter, wine glass in hand, smiling. That effortless, tired smile of someone who's decided to make peace with chaos. I stood there, dripping, holding torn grocery bags that split open on the tile. Apples rolled across the floor, one bumping against Ethan's foot. He didn't move. Rough day? Laura asked, not looking at me. Her voice had the softness of someone trying to avoid conflict. Yeah, I said, setting down the rest of the bags. Got caught in the rain. No one answered. Ethan laughed again, at something on his phone or maybe at me. I'll never know which. I remember standing there, water pooling at my feet, listening to their laughter echo in a house I paid for. That's when it hit me I wasn't family. I was the man who bought the groceries, fixed the leaks, paid the bills, and filled the silence they left behind. The man whose name was on the mortgage, but not on their hearts. My name's Michael, 42. Construction manager out of Austin. I've spent most of my life building homes for other people. Places where families could grow, where children would run through hallways without fear. Funny thing about that, you can build the walls, the roof, the foundation, but you can't build belonging. That has to be given. And in my house, it never was. 5 years ago, I met Laura at a client's barbecue. She was magnetic, the kind of woman who could make an empty room feel alive. Divorced, 2 kids. She told me she was done with men who promised everything and stayed for nothing. I believed her. Maybe she believed it too, at least back then. Her ex, Troy, was still hovering at the edges of her life. A man who had mastered the art of absence. He'd show up once every few months with a new truck, a new story, a new excuse. The kids adored him for it. He was the myth they'd built to explain why disappointment always came wrapped in charm. When Laura and I married, I told myself I could give them something steady. A home that didn't shake when doors slammed. A father figure who didn't disappear when bills arrived. I thought consistency would earn affection. I thought showing up would be enough. It wasn't. Ethan was 14 when I moved in. All sharp words and rolled eyes. He'd make jokes at my expense. Small ones, just enough to test boundaries. You don't know how Dad does it, he'd say when I grilled steaks. Or, Dad lets me stay up late, when I tried to set a rule. I told myself it was normal. A boy protecting his father's shadow. Jessica, 11 at the time, copied him like an echo. Children always do. They learn loyalty before they learn fairness. Laura called it adjusting. I called it erosion. Every day, a small piece of authority worn away by silence. Each time I tried to parent, I saw Laura flinch. torn between defending me and keeping the peace. She'd say, "They're just kids, Mike. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. Every sigh, every eye roll, every moment of withheld respect. It all added up. Tiny fractures that eventually split the structure in two. Still, I kept trying. I drove them to school, fixed their bikes, sat through parent-teacher conferences, soccer games, dentist appointments. When Troy forgot birthdays, I made sure the gifts arrived anyway. I told myself I wasn't doing it for thanks. I was doing it because it was right. But even the most selfless acts rot when they go unacknowledged. There were moments, though small, fragile ones, when I thought we were close. Like the night Jessica asked me to help with a science project. She called me Dad by accident, then froze, eyes wide with guilt. I pretended not to notice, but I carried that slip-up like a secret medal for months. Or the time Ethan asked me for advice about a girl from school. He never thanked me, but the fact that he asked at all felt like progress. I built my hope out of scraps. And then came the insult. The sentence that tore through 5 years of quiet sacrifice. "He's nobody, just some guy pretending to play dad." It wasn't anger that I felt when I heard it. It was clarity, sudden, cruel, and absolute. Like waking from a long dream to find the house on fire. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat in the dark living room. The house creaked like it was breathing with me. On the mantel were photos. Laura and the kids at the beach. Me in the corner of the frame, half cut off. That's how it always was, my presence allowed, never included. I looked at those pictures and wondered when exactly I'd started disappearing from them. I tried to remember the last time someone in that house had said, "Thank you." Couldn't. What I could remember vividly was Ethan's laughter through the door, the sound of his girlfriend agreeing. "Yeah, I get that. It must be weird having some guy pretend to be your dad." Pretend. That word lodged itself in me like a splinter. Pretending implies intention, as if I had stepped into their lives for performance, not love. As if every hour of overtime, every meal cooked, every bill paid was just part of some act I couldn't commit to. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was pretending that love could be earned, that patience could be mistaken for belonging. Pretending that being needed was the same as being wanted. The rain outside turned to thunder. I remember thinking how easy it would be to pack a bag, drive until the highway swallowed the guilt. But I didn't. I stayed because men like me always stay. We convince ourselves that endurance is virtue, that silence is strength. I told myself things would change, that Laura would see, that the kids would grow, that someday someone would say he wasn't my real dad, but he was the one who showed up. I told myself that, and I believed it, until that night, because sometimes the cruelest truth isn't shouted in your face. It's whispered in the next room, when you're close enough to hear it, but too far to stop it. After that night, nothing looked different, but everything felt different. The same house, same morning routine, same coffee brewing before sunrise, yet I could feel the distance in every sound. The clink of dishes, the half-hearted goodbyes, Laura's quick peck on the cheek before she left for work. Even silence had changed its shape. It wasn't peace anymore. It was exile. Ethan avoided me with surgical precision. If I walked into a room, he left it. Jessica followed his lead, loyalty wrapped in teenage mimicry. She didn't hate me, not really, but she learned early that her brother's approval was the currency that mattered most. And Laura, God Laura, she floated above it all. She'd say, "They're kids, Michael. They'll grow out of it." As if disrespect were a phase like acne or braces. I used to believe her. I stopped the day I realized she wasn't defending me anymore. She was defending them from me, but I kept showing up. Every morning, I packed their lunches, drove them to school, reminded them of deadlines they ignored until Laura repeated them. I fixed the fence, replaced the air conditioner, paid the insurance, smiled through parent meetings that turned into silent contests over who I was allowed to be. The teachers called me Mr. Reese with that hesitant tone, unsure if I was father or guardian or something in between. I never corrected them. I didn't know the answer myself. The first time I noticed the humiliation creeping in was small, almost invisible. Jessica's cheer practice ran late, and when I pulled up, she walked right past the truck and into her friend's car. When I called her name, she pretended not to hear. Later, she said she didn't see me. But I saw the truth she had. She just didn't want to be seen with me. That night I told Laura. She smiled faintly, stirred her tea and said, "She's a teenager, Mike. They get embarrassed about everything." "About what?" I asked. She didn't answer. From that moment on, embarrassment became the language of our household. I embarrassed them by existing, by caring, by trying to fill a role they'd already reserved for someone else. When Troy appeared, always late, always tanned, always smiling, they lit up. He'd bring movie tickets or concert passes. Small luxuries that cost less than my monthly grocery bills but carried more weight than any sacrifice I'd ever made. I'd watch them rush into his car, laughing, leaving me behind in the doorway with the trash bags and the silence. Laura said it didn't bother her. "He's their father," she'd whisper, as though saying it softly would make it less sharp. And I'd nod, because what else could I do? Argue with blood? But the public humiliation that came later. Jessica's 16th birthday was supposed to be my redemption. I spent months planning it. A rented lakeside venue, soft lights strung between trees, a live band, tables dressed in white cloth, the smell of grilled steak and summer air. I wanted her to have everything I never had. I told myself this would be the moment she'd look at me and see more than a wallet, more than her mother's husband. Maybe she'd even call me Dad again, even if by accident. The day came bright and brutal. I remember the reflection of sunlight off the lake, the chatter of teenagers, the sound of my own heartbeat trying to believe this would go right. I stood by the grill watching Laura laugh with her friends. She looked radiant, the kind of beautiful that used to make me forget the world. For a moment, I thought maybe the years of tension had been worth it. Maybe love could still outlast resentment. When the sun dipped low, I tapped my glass and called for attention. I wasn't planning to speak. I never liked the sound of my own voice in crowds, but something inside me needed them to know. I remember the smell of smoke from the grill, the flicker of candles, the shimmer of the water behind me. I raised my glass. "I just want to say," I began, "how proud I am of this young woman. She's smart, kind, and stronger than she knows. Jessica, I may not have been there for your first steps or your first words, but I've tried every day since to be the man who'd never walk away. You've made me proud in ways I can't even describe. I love you like my own." The crowd clapped politely. Some smiled. Jessica froze. For a second, I thought she was overwhelmed, touched maybe. Then she looked up, eyes hard, voice cold, and said, "You're not my father. Don't pretend you are." Laughter. A ripple through the crowd, nervous at first, then louder. Teenagers shifting, smirking, whispering. Someone recorded it. I saw the phone's red light flashing. Laura stood beside me, eyes wide, face pale, her mouth open but silent. She didn't say a word. I lowered my glass slowly, the world narrowing to the sound of water against the dock. My throat burned, but I didn't speak. What could I say? Every apology would sound like weakness. Every defense would sound like guilt. After a moment, someone started the music again. People went back to eating, laughing, pretending they hadn't just watched a man publicly stripped of his place in his own family. Laura avoided my eyes. Jessica hugged her friends and moved on, the incident already fading from her mind. But for me, it never would. Later that night, after the guests were gone and the lanterns had burned out, I found Laura on the porch. She was staring at the lake, wine glass half empty. I stood beside her, waiting for her to speak. She didn't. Finally, I asked, "You're not going to say anything?" She sighed, didn't look at me. "She's young, Mike. She didn't mean it." I laughed. Not the kind that comes from humor, but the kind that crawls out of disbelief. "Didn't mean it?" She meant every word. "And you just stood there." Laura turned to me then, her expression tight. "What did you want me to do? Yell at her in front of everyone? Ruin her birthday?" "She ruined mine," I said quietly. That silenced her. She walked back inside without another word. I stayed out there, alone, watching the last of the lights flicker over the lake. The wind carried faint echoes of laughter from the house, the kind that used to mean joy. Now it just sounded like ghosts mocking me. In the days that followed, I waited for someone to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe just an acknowledgement that what happened wasn't right. Nothing came. Jessica acted as if it had never happened. Laura pretended the air wasn't thick with shame. Ethan avoided me even more. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. I had been auditioning for a role that had already been cast. I was never going to be their father. I was the stand-in, the understudy, the man keeping the lights on while they waited for the real star to show up. I started noticing the way they looked at me. Polite when they needed something, distant when they didn't. Every thank you was transactional. Every smile a placeholder for obligation. Even Laura's affection began to feel rehearsed, as though she too was playing her part in a script we'd both outgrown. The humiliation didn't end with the party. It followed me everywhere. At work, I'd catch myself staring at families, real ones, during lunch breaks. Fathers joking with their kids. Wives leaning against their husbands. Laughter that didn't sound strained. I'd look away quickly, ashamed of the envy clawing at me. At home, the silence deepened. I stopped trying to start conversations. Stopped asking about school, about plans, about their day. Every word I spoke felt like an intrusion. I'd come home, eat alone, and lie awake listening to muffled laughter from the living room. They had built a world within my walls that no longer included me. But humiliation has a strange way of clarifying things. It strips away illusion. It forces you to see what you've been pretending not to notice. And what I saw was this. I was the scaffolding of their comfort, invisible, temporary, disposable. They'd built their lives on my labor, yet I was never meant to be part of the finished structure. It took that party, that single public betrayal, for me to understand the quiet truth that had been whispering for years. Love cannot survive where respect is absent, and respect cannot grow where silence protects contempt. That night, lying beside Laura, I stared at the ceiling and whispered a question into the dark. Not to her, not even to God, but to myself. How long can a man pretend to be part of a family that's already decided he isn't? I didn't have the answer then, but I knew one thing. The next time they laughed at my expense, I wouldn't stay silent. The foundation was already cracked. All it needed now was the final blow. The morning after Jessica's birthday felt like the quiet after a storm. Not peace, just wreckage pretending to rest. The house smelled of stale wine and smoke from the fire pit. Confetti clung to the floor, crushed under bare feet. I walked through the living room picking up empty cups, each one a reminder of laughter that wasn't meant for me. Laura slept in. The kids were out. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling in front of me, staring at the bills stacked neatly beside it. For years, those envelopes had meant stability. Proof that I could hold this house together even when love cracked. But now they looked like evidence. Evidence of how much I had given to people who would never see me as anything but an intruder in my own life. I told myself to let it go. That anger wouldn't fix anything. But it wasn't anger, not really. It was exhaustion, the kind that settles deep, past muscle and bone, into the part of you that used to hope. When Laura finally came downstairs, she avoided my eyes. "We need to talk about last night," she said softly. "No," I replied. "We don't. Mike, she's 16. You can't hold a grudge against a kid." I looked up then, steady. "I'm not holding a grudge. I'm taking inventory." She frowned. "Inventory of what?" "Of everything I've given and everything I've lost." Her mouth tightened. "You make it sound like we owe you." I didn't answer. Maybe because I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking something. She left soon after, the door slamming harder than it needed to. When the sound faded, I turned back to the bills. Electricity, car insurance, tuition, health plans, all of it under my name. All of it feeding a family that treated me like a stranger. I opened my laptop, logged into the accounts, and stared at the rows of numbers glowing against the screen. Years of sacrifice reduced to digits and due dates. Then, without ceremony, I began to erase myself. Click. Remove authorized user. Click. Cancel autopay. Click. Close joint account. Each action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized I'd given away. Within 30 minutes, my name vanished from everything that tied me to them financially. The phone plans, the streaming services, Jessica's dance lessons, Ethan's car insurance, even the Wi-Fi that carried their laughter upstairs while I sat alone downstairs. Gone. I leaned back in my chair and waited for the guilt to arrive. Didn't. Instead, there was calm, sharp, clean, unfamiliar. By evening, the first ripple hit. "Dad," Jessica called from upstairs. The word still startled me, even though she hadn't meant it in months. "The Wi-Fi's not working." I sipped my coffee. "I'll check later," I said, though I already knew why. Minutes later, Ethan stomped down the stairs, waving his phone like an accusation. "What the hell, Mike? My data plan's dead. Did you forget to pay?" I looked at him, expressionless. "No, I canceled it." He blinked, uncomprehending. "You what?" "I canceled it. You and your sister are both on your father's account now. Ask him to handle it." He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "You can't do that." "I already did." "Jesus, you're insane. You can't just cut us off." "Can't I?" I asked quietly. "You told me I'm not your father, so why should I pay for what isn't mine?" He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. For the first time, I saw fear behind the anger. The kind that comes when someone realizes the safety net they've been mocking is gone. Laura came home to chaos. The kids were shouting, Wi-Fi dead, phones disconnected. She looked at me like I'd set the house on fire. "What did you do?" "I stopped pretending," I said. Her voice cracked. "Michael, this isn't the way. It's the only way." I cut in. "I've been paying for their contempt. No more." "You're punishing them." "I'm educating them." Her jaw trembled. "And what lesson are you teaching, huh? That money buys respect." I met her eyes. "No, that respect is the only thing that keeps money flowing." She didn't speak after that, just stood there, stunned, while Ethan slammed his door and Jessica cried upstairs. By the end of the week, the consequences had started to bloom. Ethan's car insurance lapsed, and he couldn't drive. Jessica's dance studio suspended her lessons for non-payment. Their phones stayed off and the house turned quiet. Too quiet. Laura spent hours on calls with Troy, her voice low and desperate, trying to patch the holes I'd left. It didn't take long for reality to set in. Troy couldn't cover it. His credit was a graveyard. His promises cheaper than the whiskey he drank. For years, my stability had made him look dependable by contrast. Now, stripped of my shadow, he was exposed for what he was, a ghost with no substance. Ethan was the first to crack. He stormed into my office, fists clenched, eyes **T. "You can't just ruin our lives because you're hurt." "Ruin them?" I asked. "No, I just stopped financing them." "This isn't fair," he shouted. "You're right," I said. "It never was." He glared at me for a long time, breathing hard. Then softer, "I called Dad. He said he'd try." "Try?" I repeated. "That's all he's ever done." He didn't have a reply. He turned away, shoulders shaking. Not from rage anymore, but from something closer to realization. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. "Dad, I can't even fill my car. You said you'd know. I'm not asking for much. Hello?" He stared at the screen. The call ended. Then he saw me. For a second, the mask fell, and I saw the boy underneath the arrogance. Scared, unprepared for a world without my support. "Did he hang up?" I asked. He didn't answer. Jessica came next. Her dance shoes lay abandoned on the counter, the ribbons frayed. "They kicked me out of the recital," she whispered. "Mom says we'll fix it, but she's lying." I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, but it was too late for comfort. The lesson had to hurt to mean anything. By the weekend, even Laura had stopped defending them. She sat on the porch, chain-smoking, eyes red from sleepless nights. "He can't pay," she admitted quietly. Troy, he's broke. I nodded. Then maybe it's time they learned what that looks like. She looked at me, tears filling her eyes. You've made your point. Please just help them. I already did, I said. For 5 years. She covered her face, sobbing into her palms. I didn't move to comfort her. That part of me was gone. The house began to shrink after that. The laughter stopped. Doors stayed closed. Meals went cold on the table. Every silence carried the weight of something unspoken. The slow realization that the man they dismissed was the reason they'd been able to live so comfortably in their disdain. Then one evening, Ethan knocked on my door. The sound itself was strange. A gesture of respect, maybe desperation. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets. Can we talk? I nodded. He took a breath. I said some things I shouldn't have. About you. He swallowed. Look, I get it now. You've done a lot. I didn't realize. I studied his face, searching for sincerity. There was some, but not enough. It wasn't apology. It was survival. The humility of someone who needs something, not someone who understands the wound they caused. I'm glad you see it, I said quietly. But seeing isn't the same as changing. He looked at me then, eyes wet, voice cracking. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. That's the point. I don't want anything anymore. He stared at me, waiting for something. Forgiveness, maybe, but I had none left to give. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The house was finally honest. No pretending, no illusions, no forced laughter. Just truth, cold, heavy, unflinching. Troy had failed them. Laura's silence had failed them. And now they had to live with the truth that the man they mocked was the only one who'd ever kept the lights on. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt absent, and that was far more powerful. They would learn. Maybe too late, but they would. And as I lay there in the dark, the question that haunted me for years finally dissolved. I had been pretending to be a father. But the real father, he'd been pretending to be a man. When Ethan called me nobody again, the words didn't sting anymore. They sounded rehearsed, like a line he kept reciting because he didn't know what else to say. By then the house had gone hollow. The walls absorbed sound instead of returning it. Laura and I spoke only in logistics, bills, repairs, groceries, like business partners who shared a roof instead of a life. I should have seen the ending long before it arrived. It wasn't a single moment. It was the slow subtraction of meaning. The laughter that once filled the kitchen now belonged to other rooms, other people. The smell of Laura's perfume no longer felt like comfort, but like a memory of something that used to want me. Even the coffee tasted wrong. It happened on a Thursday. The sky was gray, the kind that makes time feel slower. Ethan had just turned 19 and was back home between semesters, though home wasn't the word he used. He called it Mom's place, as if my years there had been erased from the deed. He was packing for a weekend with friends, the house alive again with noise and clutter. He stood by the door, keys jingling, sneakers squeaking against the tile. Don't wait up, he said. I wasn't planning to. He smirked. Good. Wouldn't want you to pretend you care. That line, careless, automatic, was the final cut. I felt something inside me go still. Not break, not flare into anger, just still. I don't pretend anymore, I said. He shrugged. Whatever, man. Man. Not Dad. Not even Mike. Just man. I watched him walk out, the door closing behind him like a punctuation mark at the end of a long, failed sentence. After he left, I went to the closet and opened the old suitcase I'd packed months ago, just in case. Inside were the essentials. Clothes, documents, a few photos that hadn't yet soured. I hadn't known then why I packed it. Maybe I'd felt this moment waiting on the horizon. When Ethan came back that Sunday, hungover and hollow-eyed, I was ready. He stumbled into the living room to find the suitcase waiting by the door. What's that? He asked, voice still thick with sleep. Your ride, I said. I'm taking you to your mother's new place. He frowned. This is Mom's place. Not anymore. He blinked, trying to gauge if I was serious. You're kidding. I wasn't. I picked up the suitcase. heavy with everything he'd refused to carry, and walked past him toward the truck. He followed, protesting, voice rising with disbelief. "You can't just throw me out." "I'm not," I said. "I'm giving you what you wanted. Freedom from the man you said was nobody." He froze then, realization creeping across his face. "Mom won't let you do this." "She already did," I said quietly. Laura was standing on the porch when we pulled up to her new apartment. Smaller, louder, wedged between other people's noise. She looked tired, worn down by months of balancing what I'd undone. Her new husband, Greg, stood behind her, the kind of man who smiles too easily when he's nervous. The kids, his and hers, peeked from the window, curious about the stranger arriving with luggage. Ethan stood beside the truck, jaw tight. "You can't be serious." "Go on," I said, opening the trunk. "You said this is where you belong." He didn't move. Laura came down the steps, eyes wet. "Mike, please. He's still a kid." "No," I said. "He's a man. He told me so every time he wanted to cut the cord." She reached for my arm. "You don't have to do this." "I already did." I set the suitcase on the curb and closed the trunk. The sound was final, heavy and clean. Ethan's voice cracked. "What are you trying to prove?" "Nothing," I said. "Proof was never the problem. Respect was." He stared at me, searching for the man who used to fix everything. I wasn't there anymore. Laura whispered, "You'll regret this." Maybe, but regret was a softer prison than resentment. I could live with it. I turned to leave, but Ethan called out, his voice breaking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. "You can't just walk away." I stopped. The wind caught the edge of my jacket, the sky heavy with unshed rain. "I already did," I said, and got into the truck. He stood in the rearview mirror until the distance turned him into a blur. On the drive back, the silence inside the cab felt like air after a storm, raw but clean. The highway stretched ahead, endless gray ribbons slicing through the land. I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted to hear the quiet, the kind that tells you a chapter has ended. At home, I walked through empty rooms that suddenly looked bigger. The absence was almost holy. I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch, staring at the photos still hanging on the wall. Laura's smile, Jessica's wide-eyed childhood, Ethan at 14, squinting at the camera, already distant. I took them down one by one and laid them face down on the table. Not out of anger, out of truth. People think leaving is an act of cruelty. Sometimes it's mercy, for them and for you. The only way to make them see your worth is to remove it. You take the warmth, the structure, the quiet labor that made their comfort invisible, and you walk away. Only then do they start to feel the cold. A week later, Laura called. I didn't answer the first time. The second, her voice was small. "They're struggling," she said. "Ethan's taking extra shifts. Jessica's crying a lot." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "Mike, can't you talk to them?" "What would I say?" "That you still care." "I do," I said. "But caring doesn't mean returning." She went silent. I could hear her breathing, the weight of words she wouldn't say. Finally she whispered, "You've changed." "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending I hadn't." Months passed. Seasons shifted. I filled the hours with work. Long days at the site, longer nights with the hum of solitude. The house stayed quiet, disciplined, almost peaceful. Sometimes I'd catch myself setting 3 plates on the table out of habit, then laugh at the mistake. Other times, the laughter didn't come. Jessica wrote once, a short message, careful and formal. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far." I didn't reply, but I kept the note folded in my wallet. Not because it healed anything, but because it proved I wasn't invisible. As for Ethan, nothing. Silence like a debt unpaid. But I know how silence works. It matures with time. One day he'll understand that I wasn't angry. I was finished. I saw Laura again by accident almost a year later, at the grocery store. She looked older, smaller somehow. We stood there between aisles, the hum of refrigerators filling the space between us. "How have you been?" she asked. Better, I said. She nodded, eyes searching mine. Ethan's working full-time now. He's learning. He says he gets it. Good. She hesitated. He misses you. I smiled, tired. People always miss what they thought would never leave. She opened her mouth, then closed it. We parted without goodbye. Sometimes I sit on the porch at night, the air thick with the scent of rain, and I think about those years. The laughter that wasn't for me, the meals that turned cold, the silence that grew teeth. I wonder if things could have been different, if patience could have turned contempt into love. But then I remember the look on Ethan's face that last day, the disbelief that I could ever stop being what they took for granted. And I know the truth. Some lessons require absence. People like to say family is forever. Maybe it is for those who are born into it. But for men like me, men who step into lives already written, forever lasts only as long as respect does. I don't hate them. I don't wish them harm. I just hope, someday, when the weight of real life presses down on them, they'll think of the man who carried it quietly for years and called it love. Until then, I live simply. I work, I eat, I sleep. The house is smaller but solid. No cracks, no noise, no ghosts. The peace isn't happiness, but it's honest. And every now and then, when the night feels too still, I ask the question that once kept me awake. Was I wrong to walk away? Or was disappearing the only way to be seen?